The words echoed in her mind like a storm that refused to pass. She had walked into that office with trembling hope, carrying a truth that could change everything. Her hands had shaken as she clutched the small photo in her pocket, proof of a new life forming inside her. She thought he might pause, might ask, might care. Instead, his voice cut her like glass, cold, steady, final. For a moment she couldn't breathe, as if the air itself had abandoned her. The man she once believed in, the man who had spoken soft promises late at night, was nowhere to be found. Sitting before her was someone unrecognizable, distant, unreachable, unmoved. She stood frozen, caught between disbelief and pain, her heart hammering in her chest as silence stretched on like an endless road. She wanted to cry, to plead, to remind him of the love they once shared, but something stronger than tears held her still. A quiet resolve whispered inside her. This was not the end of her story. Without another word, she turned, her steps steady though her soul quaked. As the door closed behind her, she pressed her hand against her stomach. There, in that fragile moment of heartbreak, a spark of determination flickered. He may have turned away, but she would not. She would walk into the unknown, not alone, but with 2 tiny heartbeats carrying her forward. And though she didn't yet know it, those little lives would one day change everything. The days after her decision felt like walking through a fog that never lifted. She packed her few belongings quietly, leaving behind the city that had once felt alive with possibility, but now only carried the weight of betrayal. A small bus ride carried her to a town she had not seen in years, a place where the streets were narrow, the neighbors greeted each other by name, and the night sky revealed stars she had forgotten existed. Her new home was nothing more than a modest apartment above a bookstore, but it was hers, and it was safe. At night, when the silence pressed in too heavily, she would place her hand on her growing belly and whisper, "I'm still here. I'll always be here." Those words became her promise, a vow spoken not out of bitterness, but out of love for the 2 little lives quietly taking shape inside her. Each day was harder than the last. Morning sickness left her weak, yet she forced herself to work long hours, taking on any small job that would help cover bills. There were moments when exhaustion pushed tears from her eyes, but she would wipe them quickly, unwilling to let despair settle in. She began keeping a small notebook by her bed, filling its pages with letters to her children, dreams she carried for them, hopes she refused to surrender, and gentle reassurances that even before they entered the world, they were wanted and cherished. The loneliness was real, the nights unbearably long, but in the quiet rhythm of their tiny heartbeats, she discovered a strength she had never known before. Her world shifted the day the doctor placed the ultrasound photo into her trembling hands. 2 heartbeats, 2 tiny forms dancing on the glowing screen. She wasn't just carrying one child, but twins. For the first time in months, her tears were born not of sorrow, but of awe. She walked out of that clinic clutching the images as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. The heaviness in her chest lightened, and a new fire sparked inside her. The loneliness was still there, but it no longer had the same power. She wasn't truly alone anymore. Every kick, every flutter reminded her that life was growing stronger within her, urging her to keep fighting. Still, the nights were long and filled with battles unseen by anyone else. Bills piled up faster than she could pay them. Some days she skipped meals so she could stretch what little she had. Yet she never allowed despair to steal her resolve. She wrote in her notebook more often, sometimes pages at a time, as if her daughters could hear every word. "You will never feel unwanted," she wrote with shaky hands. "You will never wonder if you were enough. Because to me, you are everything." On especially difficult evenings, she would walk through the quiet streets of her small town, gazing into shop windows lit warmly against the dark. People moved inside with ease, their laughter spilling out as the doors opened. She wondered if her children would one day know that kind of belonging. The thought hurt, but it also fueled her determination. They would know joy, they would know safety, they would know love, because she would give it to them, no matter what it cost. Winter came with sharp winds and heavy skies, and by then her body carried the full weight of the 2 little lives within her. Every step felt slower, every breath a little shorter, yet her determination grew stronger with each passing day. She had prepared as best she could, tiny blankets folded neatly in a wicker basket, second-hand clothes washed and hung with care, a cradle placed by the narrow bed in her room. There was no one beside her to share the anticipation, no hand to hold when fear pressed hard against her chest, but she whispered to her unborn children every night, promising them a world brighter than the one she had endured. Then the moment arrived sooner than expected. Pain struck like waves crashing against rock, fierce and unrelenting, and she found herself in the small-town hospital under harsh white lights. Alone, trembling, she clutched the rail of the bed as the hours dragged on. Nurses moved around her with quiet efficiency, voices urging her to breathe, to hold on, to be strong. And in the haze of exhaustion and tears, she heard the sound that split her heart open, the cry of her first daughter. Moments later, another cry filled the room, softer, but just as powerful. Two voices, two beginnings. She reached out with trembling arms, and they placed both tiny girls against her chest. In that instant, the world fell away, her eyes closed, and relief washed over her like sunlight after endless rain. She kissed their foreheads and whispered through tears, "You are my miracle." Though her body was weak, her soul felt invincible. She had brought them safely into the world, and nothing would ever take them from her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, holding her twin girls close, she knew her life had changed forever. The days after the twins' birth blurred together in a mix of sleepless nights and soft lullabies. She moved like a shadow through the tiny apartment, rocking one daughter in her arms, while the other slept soundly beside her. Exhaustion pressed down on her like a weight she could never set aside, yet she kept moving, fueled by a love so fierce it outshone every moment of weariness. Each cry reminded her of her purpose. Each small hand curled around her finger reminded her why she had chosen strength over despair. She had built a fragile but beautiful world for them, and though it wasn't easy, it was real. Then fate twisted in a way she never imagined. One bitter morning, as snow flurried outside, one of her girls fell ill. The fever rose quickly, frighteningly, and she rushed to the hospital with both babies bundled tightly against her chest. Fear gripped her so deeply she could barely breathe. She whispered prayers, promises, anything to keep them safe as doctors moved swiftly. Hours passed like lifetimes until the door opened, and in that moment her past collided with her present. Standing in the hallway, stunned into silence, was the man who had once dismissed her with words that cut deep. His eyes, sharp and guarded before, now softened as they fell upon the two small bundles beside her. For the first time, his composure cracked. The sight of his daughters, the tiny faces that carried his own reflection, shook something inside him he could not ignore. He stepped forward, unsure, his voice caught between apology and disbelief. She held her girls closer, her body tense, her heart pounding, uncertain if this was a moment of healing or another wound about to be carved. The air felt thick with unspoken words, and in the quiet hum of the hospital corridor, their lives shifted toward a turning point neither had seen coming. He stood frozen in the corridor, staring at the tiny faces that mirrored his own. For months he had buried himself in work, convincing himself he had made the right choice. That detachment was strength, that he owed nothing. But in that single moment, all of his walls crumbled. The cries of his daughters cut through the armor he had built, and the sight of the woman he once cast aside, holding them fiercely, protecting them alone, left him speechless. Regret pressed against his chest like a weight he could not escape. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, his voice unsteady as he whispered their names, names he had never taken the time to ask. She met his gaze with guarded strength, her eyes carrying both exhaustion and fire. She had no words for him, not yet. Her silence told the story of nights she had faced alone, of choices she had carried without his support, of resilience he had never imagined she possessed. And still she did not turn away. Something inside her knew this moment was not about the past, but about the fragile future of the two little lives between them. He reached out, hesitating, before gently touching the hand of one of his daughters. The baby curled her fingers around his, and for the first time, his breath caught with wonder rather than pride. His voice broke as he whispered, "I was wrong." The words were not grand, not rehearsed, but raw, carrying the weight of every mistake. She studied him quietly, unsure if change could truly bloom from regret. Yet she saw something new in his eyes, a humility she had never seen before. That day became the beginning of something unexpected. Not a perfect reconciliation, not an instant mending of wounds, but the first fragile steps toward redemption. He learned that love was not about control or pride, but sacrifice. She discovered that forgiveness was not weakness, but strength. And together, with two little hands guiding them, they began to write a new story. One built not on promises easily spoken, but on choices faithfully kept.